Albany, New York, 1986. A man sits in a wheelchair outside a courthouse, and nobody on the sidewalk looks twice, because nobody on the sidewalk knows what his hands once did at 60 kilometers an hour, 3 feet from another man's knees. They know the other version of him. Ron Turcotte, the jockey who rode Secretariat, 22,000 races across 17 years, a Hall of Fame plaque, one of the very few men alive who had won back-to-back Kentucky Derbies before he turned 32. That version of him ends in June of 1973, 31 lengths clear of the nearest horse, and as far as the world is concerned, he never really moved again after that. Yet the story the world remembers ends in 1973. The story that broke him happened 5 years later, on the same dirt, in front of almost no one at all. Who was responsible for that, and what, exactly, did the law have to say about it? On July 13, 1978, at the same Belmont Park where he had made history, Ron Turcotte hit the ground. 8 years later, 7 judges in Albany would rule that no one owed him a thing for it. The story begins not at Belmont, but in a lumber camp in Drummond, New Brunswick. He was born on July 22, 1941, in Drummond, New Brunswick, one of 12 children in a French-speaking household where his father cut lumber for a living. At 14, he left school to work beside him. He was 5'1", 128 pounds, too small to swing an axe, too small for the timber itself. So they gave him the horses instead, the draft animals that hauled the logs out of the bush. Nobody called it training. It was patience, learned young and learned cold. How a half-ton animal decides whether to trust the man walking beside it. At 18, he went to Toronto. In 1960, he started as a hot walker at E.P. Taylor's Windfields Farm, the same stable, the same barns, that would go on to produce Northern Dancer. He cooled horses down after their morning work. That was the whole job. A former rider named George Thompson took an interest in him, and that winter, Turcotte broke yearlings. By the spring of 1961, he was galloping and working horses for a trainer named Gordon Huntley. In 1962, at Fort Erie, he won his first race as a jockey, on a temperamental gelding named Pheasant Lane. By the end of that season, he was Canada's leading rider, 180 wins in a year he had started as a groom. Then came the move south. In 1965, he broke through in the United States for the first time, winning the Preakness Stakes on a colt named Tom Rolfe. The boy who was only supposed to cool the horses down had, within 5 years, ridden the winner in one of the 3 biggest races in American racing. He would not walk away from a horse again for 17 more years. Not until the day at Belmont that this story is really about. By 1973, doubting Ron Turcotte was not something serious people did. A year earlier, he had ridden Riva Ridge, Meadow Stable's other champion, to victory in both the Kentucky Derby and the Belmont Stakes, a colt whose earnings had kept the stable solvent through a year that nearly ended it. That made Turcotte the first jockey since Jimmy Winkfield in 1902 to win back-to-back derbies. Whatever else 1973 would bring, the man in the irons was not the question mark. The horse was. On April 21, 1973, 2 weeks before the Derby, Secretariat ran third in the Wood Memorial at Aqueduct, beaten 4 lengths by his own stablemate, Angle Light. What almost no one knew that day was that the track veterinarian, Dr. Manny Gilman, had found an abscess under the colt's lip during the morning inspection. Trainer Lucien Lauren knew. He told neither Turcotte nor the owner, Penny Tweedy. The horse was already behaving strangely before the gate ever opened, throwing his head around during the warm-up, taking almost 30 minutes to get a bridle on, breaking straight through the starting gate at one point, and having to be walked back and reset. In the race itself, Secretariat sat back in sixth, unable to find the closing kick that had made him famous the year before. "I was very puzzled getting off him," Turcotte said afterward. "Very disappointed." He checked the horse's mouth himself and found nothing. Tweety was not disappointed. She was furious, not at her horse and not at her jockey, but at her trainer for running angle light against their own champion in the first place. "You wouldn't have wanted to be in the car with us after the wood," she said later. By the following morning, the newspapers had made up their minds. Secretariat was finished before he'd started. A talented colt who couldn't hold his form under pressure, whatever his jockey had already proven he could do. Nobody wrote that headline about Ron Turcotte. They wrote it about the horse underneath him, and Turcotte read every word of it, knowing something the writers didn't. That whatever was wrong with Secretariat that afternoon, it hadn't shown up in the warm-up by accident. 2 weeks after the newspapers buried him, Secretariat won the Kentucky Derby by 2.5 lengths, in 1 minute 59 2/5 seconds. Still, decades later, the fastest Kentucky Derby ever run, and the first one run under 2 minutes. 134,476 people watched it happen at Churchill Downs on May 5, 1973. The horse who couldn't hold his kick 2 weeks earlier had just run the fastest 10 furlongs in the race's history, with Ron Turcotte doing nothing more dramatic in the stretch than sitting still and letting him go. 2 weeks later, at Pimlico, he did it again. 2.5 lengths clear in the Preakness Stakes in front of 61,657 people. The official time that day became its own small controversy. The electronic clock read 1:55. The daily racing form's hand timer had it at 1:53 2/5, and the track corrected the record to 1:54 2/5 before the year was out. It took until 2012, 39 years, the better part of a lifetime, for the Maryland Racing Commission to settle the argument for good and make it official. 1 minute, 53 seconds flat. A track record confirmed decades after the horse who set it was already dead. The horse chasing him both times was Sham, a colt good enough to have won most derbies run before or since, and unlucky enough to have been foaled the same year as the one horse he couldn't catch. 2.5 lengths at Churchill Downs, 2.5 lengths at Pimlico. He would find out at Belmont exactly what that kind of running cost a body. By then, the money had already spoken. Secretariat's breeding rights had been syndicated for $6,080,000, a world record for a racehorse, and the deal had closed before the Preakness was even run, while the ink on the newspaper obituaries for his career was barely dry. Wall Street had made its decision 2 weeks before the horse made his. Turcotte, for his part, made no public statement about the doubters. He didn't need to. He was about to ride into the biggest race of his life on a horse everyone had just finished calling finished. June 9th, 1973, Belmont Park. 69,138 people came to watch a coronation, and what they got was something closer to a horse running alone against the clock, with 4 other animals included only as a formality. Turcotte felt it before the crowd did. "I kept hearing the hoofbeats from the others getting further and further back," he said afterward. "I could hear them fading away." Around the turn, with the race barely half run, the track announcer called out the margin, and Turcotte allowed himself the one indulgence of the entire ride. "I only looked back once when the announcer said he was 22 lengths in front. I just wanted to see what 22 lengths in front looked like." Then he turned around again, because the horse underneath him was not laboring, was not straining, was doing something closer to floating. "He was just so relaxed the whole way that I knew he would run all day. Turcotte said. He was a superhero.
Down the stretch, the margin kept growing, past anything a jockey is trained to expect from a horse that had already run 1.25 miles harder than any animal alive. Turcotte glanced across the infield at the tote board. I had to look across the track, and that's when I saw the clock turn 1:59, which was faster than what he ran in the Kentucky Derby. 1.5 miles into the race, the horse was still accelerating. He crossed the wire 31 lengths clear of the nearest horse, a margin that has never been matched, has never been approached, has never come within shouting distance of being touched in the 50 years since. The time was 2 minutes 24 seconds flat for 1.5 miles on dirt, an American record that stands to this day. He was the 9th horse in history to win the Triple Crown, and the first in 25 years, since a colt named Citation had done it in 1948. A quarter of a century of horses had tried and failed to end that drought. This one ended it by running the other 4 horses into a different time zone. "What's so amazing," Turcotte said, "is when I pulled him up, he wasn't breathing too hard, and when I took my saddle off of him, he wasn't even wet." Somewhere behind them, Sham crossed the line, last of the 5 horses in the field. The colt who had chased Secretariat through the Derby and the Preakness 2.5 lengths back each time, close enough to smell the finish and never close enough to touch it. Weeks later, his trainer, Frank Poncho Martin, found a fracture in Sham's cannon bone and came to suspect it had happened here, in this race, asking a body to do something it was never built to survive. Sham would never race again. He would spend the rest of his life at Spendthrift Farm as a stallion, siring 625 foals, in a paddock, in comfort, in peace. Turcotte would get no such second act, not from this sport, not 5 years later. 5 years later, almost to the week, same track, a different race entirely, the 8th on the card, an ordinary Thursday afternoon at Belmont Park. No network cameras, no crowd worth the name. July 13th, 1978. Turcotte was riding a horse named Flag of Leyte Gulf, a routine mount in a routine race. The kind of afternoon a 36-year-old jockey with 17 years and 22,000 races behind him could ride without thinking twice. Seconds after the gate opened, his mount clipped the heels of another horse, Walter Malone, running just ahead of him. Flag of Leyte Gulf stumbled, buckled, and went down, and Turcotte was thrown to the dirt of the same track where, 5 years before, he had ridden 31 lengths clear of anyone able to catch him. He was still on the ground when another horse, Small Raja, came drifting toward him, its rider, a jockey named Jeffrey Fell, running in the second post position that day. Turcotte did the only thing left to do. He screamed the man's name. "Jeff!" One word meant to save a life, and the last sound his career as a rider would ever produce. There was no ambulance ride back to a cheering grandstand, no retirement tour, no final lap. The fall left him with a severely crushed spine and a broken sternum. He was paralyzed from the waist down, and the paralysis was permanent from the instant he hit the ground. No recovery to chase, no comeback to plan. 17 years and more than 22,000 races, Riva Ridge, Secretariat, 2 derbies, a Triple Crown, 31 lengths at Belmont, ended in the space of a few seconds on an ordinary Thursday in a race that would not have made the newspaper if his name hadn't been on the entry sheet. He did not sue the sport, he sued the men. Jeffrey Fell, the jockey he had screamed a warning to, David Reynolds, the owner of Small Raja, the New York Racing Association, which ran the track underneath them both. The claim filed within the year, $105 million, for a body that would never again do what it had done for 17 years, for a career that ended without a finish line,
for a life that had just been rewritten in a few seconds on a Thursday nobody else would remember.
8 years after the fall, the case reached its end. And it did not end quietly. 2 lower courts had already ruled in Turcotte's favor. On November 25, 1986, the New York Court of Appeals, the state's highest court, reversed both of them and ruled unanimously against him. The doctrine the court applied was called primary assumption of risk. Looking at the nature of professional horse racing, the design of the track, the conditions under which the sport is run, 7 judges in Albany decided that Ron Turcotte had, by the simple act of riding, already agreed to something before he ever left the paddock that morning. That no one owed him more than a duty to avoid recklessness, to avoid intentional harm. Nothing more. A fellow jockey riding inches away at 40 miles an hour, in a pack of 19 other men doing the exact same thing, owed him no ordinary care for a risk the court itself called inherent to the sport, and obvious to anyone who chose to take part in it. It was the same principle, stated differently, that had let him ride 22,000 races across 17 years without anyone slowing him down for his own protection. The same freedom from restraint that had let him sit still on Secretariat's back through 31 lengths of empty racetrack and let the horse do what horses aren't supposed to be able to do. That freedom was the whole of his career. In 1986, it became the whole of his verdict. No damages, no finding of fault. No one, under the law, owed Ron Turcotte anything for what horse racing had taken from him. The man they would one day cast in bronze, standing, could no longer stand. In 2015, a statue of Turcotte and Secretariat crossing the Belmont finish line rose in Grand Falls, New Brunswick. Turcotte present in his wheelchair. "To have my own town honor me in this way is very special to me and my family," he said. The statue's tower clock reads 2:24. Sham got Spendthrift Farm and 625 foals. Turcotte got a wheelchair, 47 more years, and a 1990 high school diploma, the one he'd walked away from at 14. "I don't think of myself as being disabled," he said. "God has granted me the ability to live a wonderful life." He died at home in Drummond, August 22, 2025, beside his wife Gaëtane and their 4 daughters. Do you think horse racing owed Ron Turcotte something it never paid? Or did he settle that debt himself, every day for 47 years, without ever needing a courtroom to do it? Share your thoughts below. Thanks for watching.